Hi, I'm Dr. Ann Van Allen Russell. I'm one of the musicologists here at Trinity Laban, and I'm going to introduce you to some types of music editions available in the Jerwood Library and why they are useful to you as a performer, composer, and researcher. Now, the first set of editions we're going to look at are called urtext editions, and then critical editions. And an urtext is a modern edition of music which embodies the composer's original intent with minimal editorial interference. But there is some layer of editorial process in that printed music. And often it contains supporting material, so an introduction, it tells about the original source, it may tell about the changes they made to the printed edition that you're looking at, so it explains the editorial decisions of the music. And these printed editions replicate the original notation, but it also allows the editor an opportunity to maybe correct the text according to their critical investigations of the work and sources. The editor's work is kind of clearly notated. There are indicators in the score that will allow you to distinguish between what the editor has added and what is from the original manuscript. And you have to keep in mind that urtext edition is not the composer's written text, but it's the editor's reconstruction of it. Also, there are scholarly editions, or scholarly critical editions, which focus on performance matters that are not urtext, and we'll look at a few of those as well. And similar to the urtext, these are printed editions that replicate the original notation, but it allows the editor an opportunity to revise and correct the text according to their critical investigations of the work and its sources and any performance practice aspects that they would like to integrate. The editor's changes are again closely notated in the printed score. These critical performance editions prove useful when preparing for a historically informed performance that focuses on performances or you're researching a particular work from a particular period. Publishers of critical editions include Bärenreiter, Henley editions, and AR editions, all types of editions you find here in the library. And these editions are shelved alongside other scores in the library, and they can be borrowed from the library. So we're going to look at a few examples of an urtext and a critical performance edition. Now, we'll talk about the difference. So first we're going to look at an urtext edition, and this is a keyboard piece by Claravik Schumann. And let me open it up for you. And you'll see here's a preface that describes what's going on with the piece, contextualizes the work, when it occurred during the composer's lifetime, and may talk about the original edition. And then you can see from the score itself, let me go to this one, that it's set up where you can perform for this. This is a keyboard piece, and the page turns are set up so they are logical, make sense if you want to perform off this piece. But any editorial editions are well notated. You can see here where my finger is in bar 30. In brackets, you have an accent mark that the editor has added to this, copying what Schumann herself has added here. And we're going to move on to what's called a critical edition, a performance edition. And this is one of the editions by AR Publications. And again, like the urtext edition, you open it up, and the first thing you will see is an introduction about the piece, about the composer. And in this case, with this early 17th century piece by Caccini, you'll see they've discussed the different manuscripts they used to construct the modern edition. And again, they discuss editorial decisions. With a lot of critical editions, performance editions, you will get what's called a facsimile, one or two photographs of the original manuscript, so you have an idea of what the music originally looked like when it was printed during its time. Now, if I open up to a particular piece here, you'll see that in the modern edition, the editor here has retained some of the original elements. So you have the original clefs here, but they've been modernized here. You also, in the bass line, you see these large notes. That's what the composer is included. And then on the right hand of the keyboard, you see much smaller notes. And that is an editorial addition, as are the dotted notes for the bar lines that help modern musicians understand the meter, keep with the meter. Again, anything in square brackets, the editor has added to, again, help you as a performer in your interpretation of the piece. The same with ornaments and any type of articulation for the score. Again, these are very useful for performance, and they're usually set up where the page turns are in a logical manner so you can perform off the scores. So next we're going to move on to our next category, which are facsimiles. Now, the definition of a facsimile is that it is a photographic reproduction of the original manuscript. And all or most of the visual information presented in the source is retained and presented in a degree of detail that you wouldn't necessarily get in the printed editions like I've just shown you, or in that verbal description, the introduction, or anything about the manuscript itself. And facsimile copies are shelved either with other editions. There's also a specific facsimile section in the North Library. Now, scores in the facsimile section cannot be borrowed, but you can, you do have unlimited time in the library to use the source that you have selected. Now, you can see examples of the compositional process, some details that would not necessarily make it to a final printed score, crossouts, readjustments by composer. So it really kind of lets you understand the compositional process of the piece. Now we have two examples. One is from the 20th century composer Anton Webern, and the other is from Mozart. We're going to look at the Mozart first. Now this is a facsimile of Mozart's thematic catalog. And if I just open it up to a particular page, this is Mozart's own handwriting. And it lists all his pieces that he has composed. And in fact, this bottom piece here is Eine kleine Nachtmusik. And you can see a snippet of the music itself. And then he gives a general description of the movements of the piece, a minuet with trio and a finale, and then the instrumentation for two violins, viola, and bass. In fact, and these are photographs. In facsimiles, also like the Urtext and the critical edition, at the beginning you do have an introduction of the piece itself. And for this particular piece, the editor has given a modern version, a modern edition of that facsimile, so you can read it and then reference between the original and the modern edition. One other facsimile we have is Anton Webern, and this is a facsimile of some of his compositional sketches. And as you can see, this really gives an insight into Webern's approach and compositional process. You can see a lot of bracketing where he's rewritten certain bar numbers or certain bits of material. So here's bar 35 and he repeats it, he scratches it out, he moves it up here. Again, here's bar 22, he starts out with one thought, decides to do something else. And you get a sense of, you know, this bracketed material should actually slot here now. So you get a sense of how a composer thought about or the process of how a piece came into being. And this is stuff you would not see in a printed performance edition. Now we're moving on to our last category, which is the collected edition. Now, a collected edition is a scholarly edition that either contains all the works of a composer or sometimes works by different composers, different but related composers, so a collection of Renaissance pieces or medieval pieces. And collected editions are very useful for accessing sometimes obscure works that haven't been published separately or do not get performed that often. However, the format is not unusually user-friendly. You can't usually perform from these, and you'll see this in a moment, because they tend to be very large volumes, very thick volumes, as well. These are housed in the North Library. They cannot be borrowed, but again, like the facsimile copies, you have unlimited time to consult the sources within the library. So we'll look at two examples. One is the J.S. Bach collected edition, and just like with Urtext and critical editions, you usually have some kind of introduction. Beware, some of these can be in a non-English language. Some will have French or German and an English translation. Some will just be in a non-English text. Then you will usually find a facsimile, a photograph of a couple of pages from the original manuscript. And then you have the modern edition. Remember, there's still a layer, an editorial layer to these pieces. Most works in collected edition aren't performance friendly. You can't just put them up on a music stand and play them. However, this is a keyboard piece, and actually this one's not too bad. These are kind of binary two-part dance movements, and the page turns work out really well here. But it allows you access to works that you would otherwise not find in more modern editions. And then our final example from the collected editions is from the Mozart collected edition. This gives you a really good example of how these are more a study score or a reference score. Again, you have an introduction to the piece, you have a facsimile of the original manuscript, and this is Piano Concerto K488. And here is the opening of it. Now, you necessarily couldn't perform from this. The keyboard soloist would not be performing this, but it gives you a sense of the entire concerto. Again, a layer of editorial choices are going on here, but you have access to a full, complete piece and anything the composer may have had in the manuscript that you might not get in a different type of printed edition. So now you have been introduced to different types of editions of music, and that different types of editions have different characteristics and different purposes, and for you to access depending on what you need them as a performer or if you're doing research. And it's worth the extra effort to access the library editions, as the editions are freely, as there are other editions freely available online, such as IMSLP and other sites, but those works are mostly older works that are out of copyright, but you have to be careful with IMSLP and other online resources because they are not often well edited. They can have wrong notes. The articulation material is not correct, but we may use them in class just because they're accessible, and it'll give you kind of a flavor of the music that you're discussing in class. Then you can come here to the library and look at a much better edited version of that piece. If you need any further information, talk to your teachers or get in touch with one of the members of the Jerwood Library staff.